Hello, everyone, and welcome to day one of the Virtual Island Summit. Thank you so much for joining this session. My name is Michaela Johnson, and I'm the Impact and Growth Manager here at Island Innovation, and I'm joining you today from Trinidad and Tobago. As many of you may know, Island Innovation is a sustainable development consultancy, and our primary focus is on islands. Our services include events, strategic communications, and capacity building. We are trusted by clients around the globe, and if you're interested in learning a bit more about our work, please reach out to us using the contact information available in the chat. I'm thrilled to be moderating this session today, titled Climate Resilience Through Responsive Social Protection. This fireside chat features the Honorable Ruth Cross Kwansing, Minister of Women, Youth, Sports and Social Affairs at the Government of Kiribati. Minister Kwansing will share invaluable insights into how her ministry's portfolio, particularly through strategic use of social protection programs, is vital in building community resilience to the escalating impacts of climate change. In this session, you will discover key lessons on effectively integrating social inclusion and community health initiatives with responsive social protection frameworks to strengthen climate resilience plans. Before we begin the session, you should see a poll appear now on your screen. Please let us know where you are joining us from and the sector and industry that you belong to. So far in the chat, I see people joining us from Portugal, from Fiji, Colombia. Great to see some representation from the Pacific here as well. I invite you to make use of the chat function, introduce yourself, let us know where you're joining from, and of course, make any comments during the session. Please also make sure that you send any questions that you might have to the Q&A function. And of course, at the end of the session, we will be sure to address as many of these as possible. Okay, let's take a quick look at the poll results. I see we have quite a few persons joining us from the Caribbean, good representation from North America and Europe as well, and of course Asia and the Pacific. And the majority of people are joining us from the private sector and government and academia. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Without further ado, let's jump straight into today's fireside chat with Minister Kwansing. Minister, the floor is all yours. Can you please tell us a bit about the current social protection programs in place in Kiribati and the role that these have played in building community resilience?
Thank you so much, Michaela, and Gamna Benini Maori, everybody from the beautiful islands of Kiribati. Before I tell you a little bit about the social protection program and the work that we're doing, I think it would help for those of you who are not from the Pacific region to understand a little bit more about the about Kiribati. So we're a country made up of 33 islands in the middle of the Pacific, and out of those 33 islands, 21 of these are inhabited. We have a population of around 140,000, and from that population, we have around 70,000 who are based in the capital area of South Tarawa. So the social protection program, which is handled by our ministry, and is a very critical part of our portfolio. This program was introduced around 3 to 4 years ago, so it's very new. But how we recognize and view the social protection program is that it's a frontline defense against climate shocks. Now, if we have to understand, when you've got households that are living in poverty, they obviously need funds to be able to cope with the impacts of climate change. And so providing this money allows them to absorb and recover from the various particular challenges that are associated with poverty. So the senior citizens allowance is the bedrock of our social protection program system, and this is designed to improve quality of life for our elderly citizens. And so this particular this flagship social protection payment was brought in, and it was designed to, it's something that we felt really reflected the deep cultural respect that we have in the Pacific Islands for our elders. So what we did was we provide an elderly benefit, and that benefit more than tripled in 2020 to $100 a fortnight. And that provides 9,500 elderly Kiribati citizens with a payment. Now, we we see this payment as going far beyond a simple allowance. We see it as an empowerment for our elderly people. It reinforces their positions in the community. It allows them to financially contribute to their households and remain active and dignified participants in the society, ensuring that they don't become burdens, but rather they're pillars of support. Now, if we understand the impacts of poverty, what it does is it's hardest on those who are most vulnerable. And so when you start to see communities who, like Kiribati, were more or less living in a subsistence environment, as you become more dependent on funds, then people who can't contribute meaningfully to a household's ability to generate income start to become a bit of a burden on the family. And we very quickly wanted to shift that to put the power back in the hands of the elderly. And that's what this benefit has done by providing $50 a week, which equates to $200 a month, and is actually the largest social protection payment that is received. Then we have the support for unemployment. This is $50 a month. It's actually paid out quarterly, where they'll receive a $150 payment. And we have 54,000 beneficiaries. So this covers almost 95% of the population, in terms of households, and it has one of the largest coverage rates in the Pacific region. Again, it ensures that dignity isn't determined by employment status alone, but it provides, and this is also because formal job opportunities are also quite limited in our country. So this payment also acts as a bit of a safety net, cushioning families from the effects and traps of extreme poverty. What we know happens in societies where poverty starts, or extreme poverty becomes a real issue, is that we know that this is where more of the problems start to increase, whether it's gender-based violence as a result of the stresses, theft, all of those things that start to happen more and more as people become desperate. So we recognize that this payment likewise helps to cushion some of those aspects. Now, the support for the disability community is added on to either of those payments. And so this is another payment that's received, and it really depends on the level of disability that the person has. And that payment is then added on to the support for unemployment or the elderly benefit. So together, all these payments have a very high coverage rate in Kiribati, covering almost 95% of the families around the islands. And so in terms of the conversation around climate resilience and why social protection is important, you have to realize that climate impacts are typically slow onset, but we need to be able to provide resilience for families. If you consider the fact that families that might be living in extreme poverty, when dealt with the particular challenges that happen, whether it's drought or coastal inundation or any of the other shocks that happen as a result of climate change, if you don't have money, then of course you're not going to be able to do the things that you need to be able to do to get the food that you need, even to where to put your water. All of these things require money. So we know that this social protection program is a very critical component of Kiribati's resilience to the challenges associated with climate change and poverty.
And Minister, you mentioned, the payment benefits for the unemployed, the disabled, the elderly, as we know, all vulnerable groups in society. Are there any specific measures in place for women and children as well, or what is the overlap there with the other grants that you mentioned?
Now, we know that when it comes to women and children, or women and youth, there's a quote by Nelson Mandela that I really appreciated in terms of how we approach this. And what he said was, overcoming poverty is not a gesture of charity, it's an act of justice, the protection of a fundamental human right, and the right to dignity and a decent life. Now, what we recognize is that resilience, it requires inclusion. So this program is designed on those key principles, which is the universal life cycle from children through to young people, adolescents, as well as women. And they're all complementary, right? So these programs, they reach women, youth, older persons, persons with disabilities, and all marginalized groups who are vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So this universal approach ensures that we reduce exclusion and and ensuring that no one gets left behind. So, when we think about how poverty and climate change impacts societies, we know that those who feel these stresses the most tend to be women and youth. Where do you get your water? Where do you get your food? Whose job is it to get it? And that does generally fall to women and youth who are sort of carrying that heavy load within households a lot of the time. So this safety net does take all of those things into consideration and do its part to be able to address those issues. So what does it mean really? It means that more families have access to clean water, electricity, transport, youth, children. It provides the funds that are needed in order to ensure that youth and children are able to get to school and that they have the little bit of money that they need in order to pay for food and all those things while they're there. So I think as you start to understand how social protection works in supporting women and youth, the response is actually quite expansive in terms of how it addresses those very critical needs that where mothers are concerned for providing for their children and their access to essential services.
No, absolutely. I think the key takeaway there is that nobody should be left behind. We should make sure that everybody has the capacity to be able to deal with the impacts of climate change. So I'm sure the question on everybody's minds is how do we then adapt this in other countries and other regions? Are there any specific success stories or results that you'd like to share about the program?
Oh, absolutely. And thanks for asking. We, in the last couple of months, SPC did some work through the house and helped us develop a household income and expenditure survey in Kiribati. And the results of this survey were absolutely astounding. Even we didn't expect, we didn't expect the result that actually came through. And that is that over 19,000 Kiribati citizens have been lifted out of poverty. So seeing the poverty rate in our country drop by a phenomenal 75% has been an extraordinary thing for us to comprehend. Now, in order to understand that, you sort of need to understand what actually defines global poverty. And this is benchmarked by the World Bank's international poverty line of living on less than $2.15 per person a day, which indicates the threshold of which people's basic survival needs are being met. So by putting all of these payments together and understanding that this is now a cash transfer, a benefit that's going into households, this has reduced that overall poverty rate and the stresses on families. So this this result, was a huge encouragement for us. And so I guess our what we can say for the rest of the region and perhaps developing countries is that this investment is vital, because you need to take people out of survival mode before you can actually get them into building resilience and self-reliance through all the other programs. If you consider that someone is in survival mode, just trying to get by from day to day, how are they really going to start thinking about what else they can do to improve their livelihoods? So taking the extreme poverty out of the equation means that our population are starting to move forward in their efforts to become a more resilient people.
Absolutely. And I'm quite curious to hear as well about any collaborations or partnerships that you would have engaged in throughout the development of this program, or that you plan to engage in the future, whether that is regional or international collaboration, or even locally with civil society.
Thanks for this question, Michaela, because you actually, you give me a chance to talk about the unsung heroes that work so hard behind the scenes. Oh, I'm going to get emotional now. So we have the Partnerships for Social Protection program, and the reason why I'm getting so emotional about it is because we honestly couldn't get to where we've gotten to as quickly as we have. You have to recognize that this program has only been introduced in the previous term. And you think about a country like Kiribati, and the sheer scale of the logistical challenges to introduce a benefit like this. It's an impossible task. We're talking about a society that aren't, when financial literacy is an issue, access to banking, they don't have mobile phones. So how are you going to roll out a social protection payment that touches over 60,000 people dispersed across 21 inhabited islands? Remember that Kiribati is spread out over 3 million kilometers of ocean, of ocean space. So the disbursement and delivery of this program was, just to even think about it, it's the kind of thing that our government, when we have to do this, we will do this, but how are we going to do this? And this is where the P4SP program comes in. It's an Australian government program that works with Pacific Island countries to strengthen the national social protection systems. It provides the technical assistance and to help us to build these systems. Now, if it wasn't for this program coming in to support our ministry, I absolutely have no idea where we'd be. I think we'd be probably buried somewhere under a huge mountain of paper, and we'd have people beating on our doors and probably very furious with our ministry, which may have been struggling to deliver this program to all the people. But instead, as every week goes by, as every month goes by, we continually to strengthen this program, to harmonize the systems and improve. We have a long way to go, and we're still doing a lot of work to sort of continually improve the way that people receive these funds. But 100%, if it wasn't for programs like this and the support of the Australian government to deliver this, it would probably be and still be an absolute nightmare. But instead, we're able to see the results that have come out of that, poverty and inequality report. And instead, we can actually sit back and see how far we've come, what a great job we're doing, and then everything else that we have to do in order to get it where it needs to be. And this work is made possible by the support of these development partners, and particularly programs that exist like this to support governments around the Pacific that are prioritizing social protection for their people.
Absolutely fantastic. I mean, that was very touching. I think a similar sentiment is felt in the Caribbean, for example, where I'm from, in that we need support at the end of the day. And I think that's also felt across small and developing states and island communities. I know you would have touched on some challenges there, but are there any other specific challenges that you want to address that you would have faced in terms of scaling the program?
Look, it's one of those things. I think anyone that does work in government knows that we have a saying in Kiribati that says, "Akia tokinta tamera," which translates to saying that there's no end to improvements, right? And before, we do have so much work to do, not just with supporting our population in terms of financial literacy, because what we're seeing right now is that, yes, actually families are receiving huge investment from government, but what we're not seeing is behavioral change in order to so that families can manage the funds that are coming in so that, as I mentioned earlier, that they can come out of survival mode and get into building mode. We know that the lack of access to digital payment systems or bank accounts and lack of access to mobile phones continues to create struggles in terms of that access and receiving payments on time. If they don't receive it, they have to wait until the next payment cycle. And if you can imagine, for those who receive it on support for unemployment, if they only receive the payment every 3 months, if they don't receive it in that 3 months, then they have to wait 6 months to receive that benefit or longer in terms of receiving unclaimed payments. So again, the scale of the people that we need to reach and the fact that it's all done mostly by cash is a huge problem. So of course, the improvements that are required in order to get this where it needs to be requires cultural change, behavioral change, access to technology, and even changes in behavior in terms of how people manage their money. So I think when I talk through that, you may get a sense of the challenges that exist. And of course, when we enter these roles and when we enter the public service or when we enter leadership roles like this, that's exactly what we're doing is accepting that we're going to have to constantly identify, solve, and improve all of these, all of this, the solutions to the problems that have been identified. So it's something that we're very excited about. I mean, I guess the thing is, the more problems you identify means the more solutions you can find. So I think it's a very exciting challenge, not just for our ministry, but for our government overall. So yeah, so we're excited about that. And as I mentioned earlier, we have some very solid support that we know is going to be able to help us to do exactly that.
Absolutely. And it's definitely, a work in progress. We've seen the success, we know the importance of the program, and it's just about kind of tweaking it as you go along and learning throughout the road. We're just gonna hop into some questions and answers from the audience. So I see one question we have in the chat. Kiribati has linked social protection with climate resilience to protect vulnerable communities. How can such models be adapted in places like Maharashtra, where farmers face repeated droughts and they also face floods and heat waves, so that India's national social schemes can also become climate resilient?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. And I actually wanted to share that India also has some really great examples that we have been studying here in Kiribati. But before that, I just wanted to answer your question. When you start, when governments or when we sit down and start to think about how to respond to these types of problems, if you're talking about a situation like that, what governments can do is start to identify what types of shocks can trigger certain payments. So if you're talking about farmers and the support that they can receive, that responds to climate shocks, that's where you can look at social protection, or you can look at micro insurance type of responses, and it's not necessarily one or the other. One of the things that we appreciate in our program is the fact that we have now developed a system that accesses 95% of the families in Kiribati. We are now able to think about adaptive responses to that, adaptive approaches, which means that if we start to measure this in terms of climate shocks, then when that happens, it triggers the payment to the families. And the same thing can be done for farmers or businesses that are also impacted by climate change. So that answers that question. But I also wanted to share with you that I can't remember the name of the region, but there is a part of India where they introduced a benefit for women. And what they did was they identified that in order to help families deal with the infant mortality rates, they needed to provide more support for women. So they introduced a payment for women of childbearing age between 18 to 52 years of age. And they just provided this social protection payment to those women to address the issues such as child malnutrition and infant mortality rates. And it worked. And we find this very inspiring from the region. And we've actually been studying it to think about how we can do something similar in Kiribati. So I think it just goes to show that there are so many lessons that we can learn from different regions in terms of the ways that we're using social protection to address the various challenges that happen in our countries.
No, absolutely. I think that that type of collaboration and learning from each other is important because we all face those similar challenges. I'm sure, you see similar challenges in terms of droughts or flooding as well. And so what India is doing can then be adapted and vice versa. Is there anything else, Minister Kwansing? I think this has been an absolutely fantastic discussion. It's been very, very insightful. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up today's session?
Well, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity. And I also just want to say hello to everyone that's listening and paying attention, because obviously the people that are drawn to this conversation are more than likely doing important work within their own sphere. So I just want to wish you luck with the important work that you're doing. And I'm, very excited that Kiribati, as a very small island nation from the Pacific region, has through this program been able to be, being able to be recognized as setting a great example for, what can be done. And and I guess when it comes to, the conversations around what countries need to do in order to prepare people for climate change, oftentimes we're always looking at the very big picture approach. How do we deal with the scale of problems? And we can start to forget that real resilience comes from building self-reliance in the individual. And so as we do this, we also, yes, we think about problems at scale, how to bring water security and how to develop food security. But then we also need to come back to that individual level and say, how do we help families? How do we help mothers and children? And then how do we help people build self-reliance? Because it's from self-reliance that people and families are going to become genuinely resilient to the impacts of climate change. And so I think it's very important for governments to really think about that and to consider that social protection is a very vital part of this conversation. And thanks again, Michaela.
It absolutely is. And great to see so many messages in the chat as well. Definitely a very, very inspiring discussion. And we look forward to hearing more, of course, at future conferences in terms of the progress that you are making. Thank you so much to our audience as well for joining this session. For those of you who might have missed it, we announced very, very exciting news during our opening session earlier today. Island Innovation is partnering with the Cabildo of Gran Canaria to host the Global Sustainable Island Summit next year, 2026. After this year's experience in St. Kitts and Nevis, now the Macaronesian region and Europe will take the spotlight. The summit will be held from April 20th to the 23rd, 2026, and we will be discussing solutions and advancements in sustainability. Please note that all attendees of the Virtual Island Summit can get an additional discount on the early bird tickets using a special coupon code that will be shared with you now in the chat. So this session brings us to the end of day one of the Virtual Island Summit. We're very excited to see you all back here tomorrow for day two. We certainly have quite a few exciting sessions lined up for you. Kicking the day off with a discussion on community-driven marine conservation in St. Lucia and the Caribbean. Thank you all once again for joining us, and we'll see you tomorrow.